I want you to think about something. Right now, while you're listening to this, while the words are coming in and your mind is processing them and responding to them, there is another conversation happening. The one inside your head. The running commentary, the reactions, the small private assessments you make about everything you hear and see and experience that you never say out loud, that live entirely in the space between your ears and belong to no one but you. You are having that conversation right now. About this. About me. About whether you trust the direction this story is heading. I can't hear it. Nobody can hear it. That conversation is yours, the last truly private place most of us have. The innermost room, the one with no windows and no doors and no way in. The old people in the mountain communities of Southwest Virginia have a saying. The mountains have ears. Most people hear that as a caution about sound. The mountains amplify voices. The hollers carry a whisper a quarter mile. Privacy is different in the mountains than in the city. The land itself is always listening. But the oldest people, the ones whose families have been in these particular hollows for 200 years and more, they don't mean sound when they say it. They mean thought. They mean the innermost room. They mean that something in these mountains found the way in a very long time ago and has never stopped listening. A woman named Nora Vail moved into a cabin on Spur Ridge in Swythe County, Virginia, to write her novel. She was alone. She thought that meant she was private. This is Listener. Think carefully about what you think next. Nora Vail was 41 years old, a high school English teacher from Blacksburg, who had been working on the same novel for 6 years and had finally, in the summer before this story takes place, done the thing that writers in her situation either did or didn't do. She had taken a leave of absence, rented out her apartment, and moved to a place with no convenient distractions so that the book could get done or she could admit that it wasn't going to. The cabin on Spur Ridge was a rental, a 2-room log structure on 12 acres of wooded ridgeline in Smythe County, available by the month, listed on a vacation rental site with photographs that emphasized the view and the wood stove, and quietly concealed the hour-long drive to the nearest grocery store. She had taken it for 6 months, October through March. The off-season rate was affordable. The remoteness was the point. She arrived on the first Saturday of October, with her car loaded with books and groceries and a new laptop and the absolute conviction that she was going to use this time well. For the first 3 weeks, she did. The book moved. The quiet was what she had needed. She woke early and worked until afternoon, and walked the ridge in the evenings and went to bed tired and satisfied in a way she had not been in years. The nearest neighbor was a farmer named Hewitt, who worked the land below her ridge. She had waved to him from the road twice, but they had not spoken. The nearest town was Marion, 40 minutes away. She went twice a week for groceries and post office and the coffee shop, where she allowed herself 2 hours of internet before driving back to the mountain. She was happy. The first sign came at the post office on the last day of October. She had been wrestling for a week with the name of her novel's protagonist, not a plot problem, not a structural problem, but the specific private agony of a name that wasn't quite right and wouldn't become right no matter how many times she tried it. She had filled half a page in her notebook with possibilities and crossed them all out. She had not mentioned it to anyone because there was no one to mention it to. It was an entirely interior problem, lived entirely in her head. She was waiting at the post office counter when the woman behind the counter, a woman she had seen twice before and exchanged nothing more meaningful with than a zip code, looked up from the package she was labeling and said, without preamble, "What about Miriam?" Nora said, "I'm sorry." "For a name," said the woman. "Miriam. It's a strong name, old enough to feel rooted." She went back to her labeling. "Just a thought." Nora stood at the counter. She had not said anything about a name. She had not said anything about a novel. She had not said anything at all except to ask for a book of stamps. "How did you—" she started. The woman looked up with an expression that was not unkind and not entirely readable. "The mountains have ears, honey, that's all." She went back to her work. Nora took her stamps and drove back to the cabin and sat at her kitchen table for a long time. She did not name the protagonist Miriam, but she thought about it. It happened again at the hardware store 2 weeks later. She had gone for weather stripping. The cabin's windows were original, and the November cold was finding its way in around every frame, and she was standing in the fasteners aisle working through a plot problem in her head, a structural issue with the second act. Her protagonist needed to make a decision that would read as plausible given what the reader knew about her, but Nora had written the character into a position where any decision she made felt forced. It was the kind of problem you turned over and over without resolution, and she had been turning it for days, and she was still turning it, standing in the hardware store aisle, when a man she had never seen before stopped beside her and said, "She needs to have already made the decision before the chapter starts. The chapter should open after." Nora looked at him. He was in his 60s, a heavy-set man in work clothes, a stranger with no reason to be talking to her about anything. "I'm sorry?" she said, for the second time in 2 weeks. "The decision your character is stuck on," he said. "Make it off-page. Open the chapter after it's done and let the reader catch up to the consequences. Feels more natural." He picked up a box of screws he apparently needed and moved on down the aisle. She stood among the fasteners. She had not spoken aloud. She had not been speaking to anyone. The problem had been entirely inside her head. She looked at her hands and thought, with a calmness that surprised her, "Something is reading my mind." She thought it the way you thought something you had known for a little while and were finally ready to say. She drove home and wrote for 3 hours, using the solution the man in the hardware store had given her, and the second act opened up like a door. The incidents accumulated over November, like items on a list she had not meant to keep but could not stop adding to. The young woman at the coffee shop who mentioned while handing over a latte that she thought the flashback structure Nora had been considering would work better in the third act than the first. The man at the gas station who told her, entirely unprompted, that winter was coming in hard this year, which she had been worrying about in the context of her cabin's heating system and the oil tank level she had not yet checked. The librarian in Marion who had a book waiting for her at the front desk that she had not requested on a subject she had been curious about for a week and had not yet looked up. None of them acknowledged anything unusual. None of them explained or elaborated or invited questions. They offered the information the way you offered local knowledge to a newcomer, casually, as one item in the natural flow of conversation, and then moved on. As if it was ordinary. As if it had always been this way. She started keeping a log. Dates, locations, exactly what had been said, what thought it had corresponded to. She was a writer. She documented. By the end of November, she had 17 entries. By mid-December, she had 31. She went to see her neighbor on a Tuesday in December. Not because she thought he would have answers, she had no particular reason to connect him to what was happening, but because he was the person she had seen most consistently since arriving on Spur Ridge, and she had not yet spoken to him. And she was beginning to feel that the isolation she had come here for was metastasizing into something less healthy than solitude. She walked down the farm road to his property and knocked on the door of his farmhouse, which was a modest white clapboard structure surrounded by the organized evidence of a working farm, equipment sheds, a barn, the neat geometry of fence lines running out into the winter-brown fields. Hewitt Cass was 64 years old. A quiet man with a quality of stillness that she recognized by now as characteristic of people who had spent a long time in these mountains. Not passivity, but the specific economy of movement and speech that came from living in a place that didn't reward hurry. He invited her in for coffee without particular surprise, as if he had been expecting her, which she noted and did not remark on. They sat at his kitchen table, and she told him what had been happening, all of it in order, from the post office on the last day of October to the most recent incident 3 days ago, when the woman who ran the small church thrift shop in Marion had suggested, as she was ringing up a sweater, that Nora might want to move her protagonist's breakdown from Chapter 9 to Chapter 11 because the story needed more time to earn it. Hewitt listened without interrupting. He was very good at listening. She had the impression, as she talked, that he heard not just what she was saying, but the shape of what she meant, the intention behind the words. It was pleasant and slightly disconcerting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you known about it?" "Known?" she said. "That you were being heard. Not when did the incident start. When did you know?" She thought about that. "The post office," she said. "The first time. I think I knew then." He nodded. "You're not frightened," he said. It was an observation, not a question. She considered that. "I should be," she said. "Shouldn't I?" "Most people are," he said, at first. "Then most people aren't." "What is it?" she asked. He poured more coffee. He took his time with it. "My family has been on this ridge for 6 generations," he said. "My great-great-grandmother was born in this county and died in this county and never went further than Marion in 81 years. What she knew about these mountains, what she understood about them, most of it didn't get written down. It passed mouth to ear, and some of it got lost, and some of it got distorted, and some of it I have, and some of it I don't." He set his cup down. "What I have is this. The mountains here are old, older than most geology in this part of the continent. The Blue Ridge is some of the oldest surface rock on Earth, pre-Cambrian, over 1 billion years. And the thing that lives in the rock, that has always lived in the rock, is as old as the rock. Not sentient the way we're sentient, not conscious the way we're conscious, but aware, the way something is aware when it has been in one place for a very long time, and everything that passes through that place leaves a trace." He paused. "It doesn't read minds, not exactly. It's more like everything thinks. Every person who has ever stood on this ridge has had thoughts, and thoughts are physical things, electrochemical events. They produce something, a trace. And over 1 billion years of life passing through this place, the rock has learned to receive those traces, to hold them, to sometimes give them back." "Give them back," Nora repeated. "Through the people who live here, who have been here long enough that the receiving goes 2 ways. He looked at his coffee cup. "My grandmother used to know what I was thinking before I said it. I thought for a long time it was just what grandmothers knew. It wasn't." "You can hear me," Nora said. He was quiet for a moment. "Since the first week you were here." She sat with that. "And the others? The woman at the post office? The man at the hardware store?" "People who've been here longer, some more than others. The older families. It's stronger in some than others. It's stronger in the winter, when the rock is cold and the conduction is better." He said it the way he'd describe drainage patterns or soil composition, a property of the terrain, known and unremarkable. "Does it bother you? Hearing?" "Sometimes. Mostly it's quiet. People's thoughts are mostly quiet. Worries, practical things, what to make for dinner. Occasionally something worth attending to." He looked at her with what she now understood was a particular quality of attention. "Your novel is good for what it's worth, what I've heard of it." She laughed. She surprised herself with it. "That's the strangest review I've ever gotten." She stayed for the full 6 months. She had half expected to pack up and leave after the conversation with Hewitt, to drive back down off the ridge and return to Blacksburg and the comprehensible world where the space inside her head was hers alone. She thought about leaving for several days. She thought about it carefully and without panic, the way she tried to think about difficult things. And she stayed. Partly because the novel was going well, better than it had ever gone, the second act unlocked and the third in motion, and the end visible from where she was. Partly because there was something she needed to understand about what was happening here before she left it. But mostly because Hewitt had said, "What I've heard of it, your novel is good." And she had felt, hearing that, not violated or exposed, but recognized. The way you felt when someone who had been paying close attention told you that what they'd seen was real. She had been trying to write an honest book for 6 years. The idea that the mountains themselves had been reading it over her shoulder and found it worth the attention was not entirely unwelcome. She stayed, and she wrote. December deepened, and the snow came, and the ridge was white and silent, and she worked every day in the cabin with the wood stove going and the windows fogged, and her thoughts moving through the cold rock beneath her feet. And she had, for the first time in 6 years, the conviction that the book was going to be what she had meant it to be. Hewitt came for dinner twice in December and once in January. They talked about the mountain and the book, and the county's history, and his grandmother, and the 6 generations of his family in this place. He was good company, quiet but not empty, attentive without being intrusive, and she found, gradually, that knowing he could hear her thoughts did not feel the way she would have expected it to feel. It felt, she decided, like being known. Not exposed, not surveilled, known. The way you were known by someone who had been paying close attention to you for a long time and had seen the best of what you were trying to do. She thought, I could become one of these people. I could stay long enough that the rock learns me, that I learn to receive as well as transmit. I could stay and be known by this mountain for the rest of my life. She thought it clearly and completely. And from the farm below the ridge in the cold January morning, she heard, or felt, or received, through the stone beneath her floor and the stone beneath that, and the pre-Cambrian bedrock 1 billion years old and cold and listening, a single response. Not words, not a voice, something simpler than either. An acknowledgement. As if something very old and very patient and very far beneath the surface of things had heard her, and had noted her, and had, in its own way, said, Yes, we know you. You have been here before. Nora sat very still at her desk. Outside, the snow lay white on the ridge, and the trees were bare against the gray sky, and the mountain was quiet in the particular way mountains were quiet when they were full. She opened her laptop. She wrote. She finished the novel in March. 2 weeks before her rental ended, on a Thursday morning, she typed the last sentence of the last chapter and sat back and felt the particular specific exhaustion of a thing that had been carried for a long time and was finally set down. She read it through over 3 days. It was good. She knew it was good the way you knew the things you had made well. Not arrogance, just recognition. The protagonist's name was Miriam. The second act opened the way the man in the hardware store had suggested. The flashback structure was in the third act. Chapter 11 held the breakdown. She thanked none of them in the acknowledgments. She didn't know how she would. She went down to say goodbye to Hewitt on the last Saturday of March, the day before she drove back to Blacksburg. They sat on his porch in the cold early spring morning and drank coffee and looked at the ridge she had lived on for 6 months. "Will you come back?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, and then, "Yes, probably." He nodded. "It will remember you," he said. "However long you're gone. When you come back, it will know you the same day." She thought about that. "Does that frighten you?" she asked. "To be known that way? To have no private thoughts? Ever? Not really?" He looked at the mountain for a long time. "My grandmother used to say, the only thoughts worth having are the ones you'd be willing to have out loud." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I used to think that was just something people said. I don't think that anymore." She drove back down the mountain in the late afternoon, and she did not look back at the ridge in the rearview mirror because she knew she was being watched, and she did not want to acknowledge it, and she was not entirely sure she could. She got to the state route, and her phone found signal, and she had 17 unread messages from her life before the mountain, and she sat at the junction with the engine running for a long time before she pulled out onto the road. She told me this story on the phone from Blacksburg 6 weeks after she left Spur Ridge. I asked her whether she missed it. She was quiet for longer than felt comfortable. I catch myself, she said finally. Catching myself, I mean. Monitoring my thoughts. Not from habit, more like I got used to not being alone in there. And now I am, and it feels quiet in a way that wasn't there before. Empty? I said. No, she said, not empty, just returned to myself, the way a room feels returned to itself after someone has been staying there. A pause. Like something has been listening very carefully for 6 months and has finally gone quiet. Has it? I asked. A long pause. Mostly, she said. Mostly. Mostly. There was a thing 2 weeks ago. I was in my classroom, 30 sophomore students in front of me, mid-lesson, and I had a thought, a private thought, something I would never have said aloud, about whether I had made the right choice coming back, whether the book would have been better if I had stayed for a second year. And, I said, and the student in the front row, a kid I've taught for 2 years, never said anything unusual in all that time, looked up from his desk and said, very quietly, I think you should have stayed. The line was quiet. He didn't know what he said, Nora told me. He looked confused when I stared at him. He went back to his work. It was as if he hadn't said it at all. I asked her what she thought that meant. She said, I think it means the rock learned me well enough that it didn't need the mountain to say it. She said, I think the mountains have longer ears than anyone knew. The Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia are Precambrian rock, over 1 billion years old, some of the oldest surface rock on Earth. In 1 billion years of absorbing the traces of everything that has lived and passed through this place, what do you suppose it has learned? What do you suppose it is still learning? Right now, if you are anywhere in the mountains, if you are close to the old rock, the Precambrian stone, the ridge and the holler and the deep root of the oldest range on the continent, something may be receiving what you are thinking. Not reading it, not understanding it the way a person understands a person. Receiving it, the way stone receives everything that passes over it, the way water receives a stone. Holding it, for a very long time. The mountains have ears. Think carefully about what you give them. The Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia are Precambrian rock, over 1 billion years old, some of the oldest surface rock on Earth. In 1 billion years of absorbing the traces of everything that has lived and passed through this place, what do you suppose it has learned? What do you suppose it is still learning? Right now, if you are anywhere in the mountains, if you are close to the old rock, the Precambrian stone, the ridge and the holler and the deep root of the oldest range on the continent, something may be receiving what you are thinking. Not reading it, not understanding it the way a person understands a person. Receiving it, the way stone receives everything that passes over it, the way water receives a stone. Holding it, for a very long time. The mountains have ears. Think carefully about what you give them. If listener reached you somewhere private tonight, if you felt, even for a moment, a little more careful about what you were thinking, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Leave me a comment. Tell me something you've never said out loud. Or don't, because whatever you think while you decide, I might already know. Subscribe. Turn on the bell. Good night. Think kindly. The mountains are listening.